Assalamu alaikum. Dear students, you are welcomed to my new online class. Now I am going to discuss sentence structures. I will discuss three types of sentence structures. They are simple sentence, complex sentence and compound sentence. At first I will discuss simple sentence. What is simple sentence? We know simple sentence is an independent clause. Simple sentence is an independent clause which has a subject and a finite verb. In a simple sentence, there will be only one subject and one finite verb. In other words, in a simple sentence, there will be only one clause, that is independent clause. And an independent clause is a completed thought. An independent clause can express its meaning without depending on others. In a simple sentence, there will be an independent clause, dear students. If you can't remember an independent clause, you can remember or you can follow another way to identify a simple sentence. That is, there will be only one subject and one finite verb in a simple sentence. And you can remember that a subject and a finite verb will comprise a simple sentence. Okay? If you find a subject and a finite verb in a sentence, at that time you can call it a simple sentence. There is an example of simple sentence. In spite of walking fast, he couldn't reach the station. He couldn't reach the station in time. This is a sentence. And in spite of walking fast is the first part of the sentence, and there is no subject and no finite verb, and that's why we can call it a phrase. But the last part of the sentence, he couldn't reach the station in time, it is a clause, and we can call it an independent clause, because if we translate this part of the sentence into our native language, we will see that it can express its meaning without depending on others. In other words, this clause is a completed thought, and that's why we can call it an independent clause. As the sentence contains an independent clause only, or the sentence contains only one subject and only one finite verb, we can call it a simple sentence. Dear students, now we will go to the complex sentence. What is complex sentence? Complex sentence or complex sentences are comprised of a dependent clause and an independent clause. In a complex sentence, there will be a dependent clause. There will be two clauses. One will be dependent clause and another will be independent clause. And with a dependent clause, there will be a subordinating conjunction, such as there may be if, unless, though, although, as, since, because, so that, in order that, etc. And a dependent clause is not a completed thought. That means this clause should depend on an independent clause to express its meaning. It can't complete its meaning without depending on an independent clause, and that's why it is called a dependent clause. Dear students, in a word, in a complex sentence, there will be two clauses. One will be dependent clause and another will be independent clause. And with a dependent clause, there will be a subordinating conjunction. These are subordinating conjunctions. If, unless, though, although, as, since, because, so that, in order that, who, which, what, that, etc. If you find one of these subordinating conjunctions with a clause, at the time we can call it a dependent clause. So, to identify a complex sentence, you must memorize or you must remember these subordinating conjunctions, dear students. Now, we will explain an example of complex sentence. Though he walked fast, he couldn't reach the station in time. Though he walked fast, he couldn't reach the station in time. This is a complex sentence. We know in a complex sentence there are two clauses, one each dependent clause and another each principal clause. Principal clause or independent clause. Look at the first clause of the sentence. There is a subject he and there is a finite verb available in this part of the sentence or in this clause. As there is a subject and a finite verb, we can call it a clause. And with this clause, we find a subordinating conjunction. Now, dear students, if we take the sentence, the clause, if we take the clause away from this sentence and try to translate it into our native language, we will see that it is not a completed thought. It can't express a full meaning. It can't complete its meaning. And that's why we should call it a dependent clause. But the last part or the last clause of the sentence, that is, he couldn't reach the station in time. There is a subject he and couldn't reach, each a finite verb, and that's why we can call it a clause. But what type of clause is it? Of course, it is an independent clause. Why? If we take the clause away from the sentence and try to translate into our native language, we will see that it is a completed thought. It can complete a meaning without depending on others. And that's why we can call it a independent clause. As there is a dependent clause and an independent clause in this sentence, we can call it a complex sentence. And with the dependent clause, there is a subordinating conjunction. So we will call it a complex sentence. What is compound sentence? What is compound sentence? Compound sentences are the combination of two or more independent clauses. Most of the time, we find two clauses in a compound sentence. We find two clauses and both of them are independent because they don't depend on others to complete their meaning. Both of them are completed thought. And between these two clauses or in the middle of the sentence, there will be a coordinating conjunction. In a complex sentence with a dependent clause, we find a subordinating conjunction, but in a compound sentence, there will be coordinating conjunctions. I have written some coordinating conjunctions here. They are and so, but, or, so, yet, therefore. They are coordinating conjunctions, and these coordinating conjunctions work to join both the clauses, both the two clauses, two independent clauses. There is an example on the board. He walked fast, but he couldn't reach the station in time. This is a compound sentence. How can we identify a compound sentence, dear students? Look at the sentence carefully. He walked fast. This is a clause. He is a subject, walked is a finite verb. So, as there is a subject and a finite verb, we can call it a clause. In the middle of the sentence, we find but. It is a coordinating conjunction that works to join both the clauses. At the last part of the sentence, we find another clause, that is, he couldn't reach the station in time. Here is also a subject he and a finite verb, couldn't reach. This is a finite verb. As there is a subject and a finite verb, we can call it a clause. But is it an independent clause? Is it an independent clause? Of course it is an independent clause. Why? If we take the clause away from the sentence and try to translate it into our native language, we will find that it is a completed thought. It can complete a meaning, and that's why we will call it an independent clause. It is also an independent clause because it is also a completed thought. It also can complete its meaning by itself without depending on others or without depending on other clauses. So, dear students, we are noticing that there are two clauses and both of them are independent, and to join them there is a coordinating conjunction in the middle of the sentence. That's why we can call it a compound sentence. Dear students, in short, in a simple sentence, there will be only one clause, that is an independent clause, which has a subject and a finite verb. In other words, in a simple sentence, there will be only one subject and one finite verb. In a complex sentence, there will be two clauses, but one is dependent clause and another is independent clause. And with a dependent clause, we will find a subordinating conjunction. Okay? And in a compound sentence, we will find, or there will be, two or more independent clauses. Most of the time we find two clauses and both of them are independent, and to join them a coordinating conjunction will work here. So I hope you can understand the lesson properly, and I will return again with a new class, with a new video. Till then, goodbye.